You have scraps? Well, I have scraps too. If you saw the title of this and you read chenille, this is not quite the chenille from the 40s or the 50s. Those are really cool cottagecore bedspreads. I want to take some scraps, use the Brother Stellaire embroidery machine, and turn those scraps into, well, this is kind of a fun embellishment. And I can do an all over. So it'd be a quick and easy project to make a pot holder, or really take that quilt maybe to the next level with some fun embellishments. I'm Cathy. This is Sewing Tech Talk. We're going to take some scraps, scrap bust them with some chenille. So maybe you remember chenille from those bedspreads or bathrobes that were so popular in the 40s or the 50s. They're still cottage chic, but we can do some maybe modern looking chenille. The best part of this is it's quite a scrap buster. If you sew or quilt, and you probably do if you're watching this, when you buy materials for a project, you usually buy a little bit more, right? In case there's an error. Well, if there is no error, yay, but you have the leftover materials, and those are scraps. And they can build up over a while. So I'm always looking for something that will, use up all my little scraps. And the little scraps, I know you can sew those together, and it's kind of a meditative process to sew these little scraps together. And yeah, that's great. I've done that before. But I have a mountain, and they need to go away. So I came up with this idea that making chenille, which I think is pretty cool, modern chenille that is, that I can use up my scraps. So there's really two ways to make chenille on our embroidery machine, and there's designs out there that do that. One way is just to layer fabrics together. You sew a design, and then you slash the top layers. There are multiple layers on the top, and then when you wash it and you abrade it, it comes up chenille and fluffy. There's another way to make chenille, and you can actually buy pre-made. It's like chenille that you're just going to sew on, and it looks a lot like this. In fact, it is this. So it looks like this. And what it is, it's strips that you cut apart, and you tear away the backing, and then this fluffs up. This happens to be 3 layers, and it's this size. So that's great and super convenient. But if we make our own using our embroidery machine, and we can, because we have, if we're on a brother, like the Brother Stellaire, we have My Design Center, and we can make our own embroideries pretty fast. If you're on a baby lock, it's called IQ Designer. And we can easily make our own chenille. I'm going to do some diagonal lines, because really pretty chenille, what happens is it's always on the bias. Because what happens is when you release this and then you abrade it, all these fibers kind of come open, right? And then they create that fluff that we know as chenille. And if you do it on the straight of grain, well, you just kind of have strings. But if you do it on the bias, here's the threads on the bias, what happens is they fluff open, and well, they look much, much better. So having said that, we're going to have to do diagonal lines on the true bias of the fabric, which is a 45-degree angle on our square fabric. Easy to do when we're using My Design Center or IQ Designer. So we need to get there and do that. But first, let's talk a tiny little bit about what fabric works. Any scrap kind of will do, as long as we want it to fray now, right? So if you have 100% cotton, that's what I'm mostly using here. If you have a cotton linen blend, if it's more loosely woven, it's going to give you a little bit more beautiful chenille. Now I'm going to do scraps, and scraps are all multicolors. If we make our own, we can make the chenille any color that we want. If we need to match a project, we're making our own. We're automatically going to match. But if you're making chenille and you're just making the chenille itself, say you want it to look more vintage or like that cottage core kind of look, this is like a cotton linen blend, and it's pretty loosely woven. It would make an exquisite chenille. This is a fabric that's kind of a dish towel kind of fabric. If you go to the big box fabric stores and you find the least expensive of all possible muslin, that makes great chenille. So if you're going to do it all the one color, use the same process, and you can have, yeah, your own chenille that way. So now let's go to IQ, My Design Center, because we're on a brother, and let's create those diagonal lines. This is a great beginning project if you're very new to this process, because we're just making straight lines and you get to manipulate them, and it's really not super critical. Well, it's important how they lie out, but it's not super critical the distance. So let's go to My Design Center, and on My Design Center you'll notice I have a grid brought up. You can bring up the grid in the settings. This is a 1-inch grid, and this workspace here is the size of my largest hoop. On this machine, it's 9.5 by 14. I'm going to be using my 9.5 by 9.5 inch hoop. So what I want to do is I want to have an outline so I can design within that. And if you look here on the workspace, you can see this line right here. That's my 9.5 by 9.5 inch hoop. So I'm going to design to work within that. Now, there's different sizes of chenille that you can make. This one, I'm going to call it kind of a jumbo chenille. If you could look at this pre-made, I want mine to be just a little bit larger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the grid lines to make it a little bit larger. Say I don't want it large. Say I want some teeny tiny baby chenille. And that can look really good. In fact, on this, let me grab this. This little design I kind of experimented with, and I made a smaller chenille just to experiment, and when I did my embroidery I used those lines to put it down, and it turned out kind of cool. So it's like a smaller version of the chenille. And I know when you first make it and you put it down, it doesn't look very good, so stick with me. We're going to make the chenille fluffy in the end, I promise. So here we are at My Design Center. If I want to make my design grid smaller, I can go into settings, and here's where I can make the grid smaller, a 3/8 inch grid. I'm sticking with the 1 inch, and here's where I tell it what size hoop I want to design for and within. So I'm going to say OK. Now I want a diagonal line that's exactly 45 degrees. There's a couple ways to do it. When I'm designing for lines, I'm up here in the Line Properties menu, and I don't want to zigzag for sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, let's just make our lines like a red color so that we know, and I want that double run, which is the smallest run. It's more like a straight stitch, and it just does it twice. So I'm going to say OK. Now, here's my pencil. Oh, while I was there, I should have showed you. Here's where I make a straight line. This is where I make a line with an angle, but I want a straight line. So now, I'm going to say OK. Now I have my grid, and if I go along the intersections right along here, I'm going to get a straight line. And I'm drawing a line, so I might be good at this, I might not, but I have a trick in case you're not. So I'm just going to use my finger to draw, and I'm going to start right here, touch the screen, and when I'm here, notice before, if I don't take my finger off, what I can do is I can make a line that's pretty close to a 45-degree line. And when I release it, there I am. Now that line is selected, so if I want to, that line is not selected, if I want to play with it, I'm going to have to select it. And that's this little box right here. And I can select by drawing a box around that line, but I kind of have to get the whole line. So I find this, it's not as easy to do. I'm going to show you another trick. So let's clear off that screen. Okay. Now, I'm going to go into the Shapes tab, and I don't have any straight lines in here, but I kind of do. I have this little box right here. So I'm going to select the box, and I'm going to say, OK. Now, notice I have my box, but I have that red selection line around it as well. And that means I can kind of manipulate it, and I don't have to try to capture it by selecting the whole thing. Now, this is two straight lines, two ways. So let's make the top straight lines going straight up, vertical straight lines. I'm going to go into size, and I'm going to take this box and make it really tall. Really tall. Here it comes. Whew. And now I have a really tall box. But I want my chenille to be a certain width, right? And I can kind of judge that and I can kind of guess it. But I can actually take this box and I can make it so that my lines are a certain distance apart by making my box narrow. So I'm going to make my box narrow, and you can see right up here I have the dimensions of the side, and it's going down, down, down. I think I'm going to make my chenille maybe about a 1/2 inch wide, which means that I need my box to be a 1/2 inch wide, because when I do the lines and I cut it apart, that's going to give me the 1/2 inch. So let's see if I can get it down to a 1/2 inch. Wow, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's pretty close to a 1/2 inch. Now I have my 2 parallel lines. I don't want the box part on the end, but that's kind of okay. Check it out. I'm going to say okay, and I can erase those tops and the bottoms, but I'm going to shoot it off into the space of the workspace. Let me show you what I'm talking about. First, I want a perfect 45-degree angle, right? So when I go to rotate, I go 10%, 10 degrees, 10 degrees, 10 degrees, and 5 degrees by doing that, just like that. Okay? Now, I want this to be multiples. And so what I'm going to do is I can see it's not long enough. We're going to take the size. We're going to make it taller. And do you see how it's shooting out on either side of the workspace? That's okay. We're going to take care of that. Okay. The 2 lines are still selected. So now let's just duplicate them, go into the size key, and then just move them into position. Now I'm just going to eyeball it, because if your chenille isn't absolutely perfect, you're not going to notice it. It's going to be okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep reproducing these, using the size key and my move keys to move them, kind of eyeball where they need to go. Approximately, I want the distance apart to look the same as they are apart. That makes sense, right? And I'm just going to keep going to get my lines exactly where I want them to be. Now this is going to take you a tiny little bit of time. Pour yourself a nice glass of iced tea and have fun doing it. Once you do it though, you have it. You're going to save the design, and you can use this design over and over and over and over again. So let's say I put all of my little lines in there, and I want to clear up the ends because I want this to fit my 9.5 hoop, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my eraser, and I'm going to just come along the outside edge, and I'm going to, whoops, my eraser, and I'm just going to clear out the outside edge exactly where I don't want my little lines to be. And I want to make sure I get all the lines everywhere that are not inside my hoop. So you can see I made some lines, and I used the eraser to clean them off. And I made that double run. So now, of course, I would go in and finish the whole thing. Or maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you only want this much chenille. So when I hit next, I will see that I have all of my different lines. The length of the stitch kind of doesn't matter, does it? At this point, if I have all my lines in there, what I really want to do is save this artwork. So I would touch this key to save this artwork into the machine. Remember, you can make your chenille jumbo, small, whatever size that you want. I have already done that. I've kind of made it the size that I want. So I'm going to leave IQ Designer, and I'm going to pull up the design that I saved in the memory of the machine. We're going to go home. Okay. And in embroidery, I saved my design into the memory of the machine. I want to show you 2 things though. Before I come to the what I'm going to do, here's my little micro chenille. Look at how tiny those are. And it makes chenille that is, well, it's just about that big. It's not very big at all. And that's the one I used to go around all those, the embroidery lines that I had. This is pre-made. This is chenille that you can apply just about wherever you want. The first thing we're going to do though is we're going to do our, I'm going to make I never have enough pot holders. I have a bunch of scraps though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a great pot holder, great way to use up scraps. So cancel. I really want the chenille that's a little bit bigger, like I just showed you how to make. Set. And there it is, ready to go. Now one thing I did is I layered all my different scraps in my hoop. So take a look at my hoop here. Here's my hoop. I put a base fabric down and I have all my scraps, and these I know are pretty much going to make me some good chenille. This one's especially going to be good because can you see how it's already trying to fray? So that's a good fabric for a chenille. Now see how I have this scrap here? I want the grain of the fabric to be parallel to the edge of the hoop because I want to be sewing on that true bias of the fabric to get the nicest chenille. So even though my scrap isn't straight, what I have made sure to do is that these lines, the threads going this way and the threads going this way, are parallel to the edge of my hoop. So I know that's going to be great. Now at this point I could go ahead and maybe put a wash away stabilizer on the top, or I'm just going to put just a regular piece of fabric on the top, and we won't see those scraps until we're all done with our embroidery. If you put the wash away stabilizer on, or this top fabric on, what it does is it makes sure that your foot isn't going to catch on the edges of all of those scraps, because that wouldn't be fun. But I want to baste this down to make sure that it doesn't lift up at all. So I'm going to select my basting function on the machine. When I go to embroidery, under layout, I have this little icon right there, and that puts a basting box around the edge of the design. Now if you've made your lines so that they're pretty much filling up that hoop, and if you touch that basting box, it might say you don't have enough room, because there's always a little bit of edge that goes around the basting. If that happens to you on any design, you can always fix that. So I'm going to go to my settings, and can you see, let's see, where is it? Is it the next one? The embroidery basting distance. Now this is the distance that the basting box is going to be away from the design. If you ever have a design that's pretty much filling the hoop and you can't put a basting box around it, you can take that down to 0 and it's automatically going to go around there. I can change it. The default setting is 0.2 inches. So that's almost a 1/4 inch. I'm going to take it down to 0 because that works for me in this design. Don't forget, you can always come back to the settings and change it. Okay. Now I have that basting box around there, and I have 2 colors. I have the first color, which is the basting box, and my next color, which is my embroidery. And here's my other little trick. When I have my fabric here, I want to baste it down, but I want to make sure it lies flat. And I don't know about you, but I'm not pretty fast when the whirling needle of death is going. So if you want to start your machine and have it stay slow, all you have to do is press the start button and keep it depressed. And that's going to take the machine very slowly around this outside edge. Let me show you how that works. I'm just going to press the button. The machine's going to go to its beginning part, and it's going to take its basting box. Oops. I'm already gone crazy, right? So I need to hold this down just a little bit better. And if I pressed the button and it started real fast, who knows what would have happened. So let's get that fixed. These are just basting stitches, and they come out real simple and real easy. Can you see how that would have been a disaster if I hasn't been going slow? So let's go here. If we need to go back into within our design, that's the ± key right here, and we can go back to 0, but we can also take it back just a few stitches, and the green X here shows you exactly where it is. So let's try this one more time. Okay, so here we are. We can hold it down. Always be super careful when you're touching your fabric and that needle is going. You want to be very careful. So here we are. We're going to hold that down. So can you see when I got to where I thought the fabric was going to behave, I just let the machine rock and roll. And it was going pretty slow, but not slow enough to catch a mistake. So now all I have to do is stitch my diagonal lines, and then we're going to cut our chenille apart. After this stitches, let's come back and I want to show you how you can apply that pre-made chenille. I got a pretty fun project that I think you might like. So let me stitch this. It's really only going to take 6 minutes and I'll be, before I forget, if you want this to run a little bit faster, what you can do is you can come into the machine and you can tell the machine that you don't want it to cut jump stitches in between, because between each one of these lines, then it's going to clip and cut that jump stitch. If you don't want that, you're going to cut it. If you cut it around the edge anyway, it doesn't matter. But if you don't want that, you can always turn that off. If it's off, it has a white box, and if you have it blue, it's going to clip those stitches in between. So this might take a little bit more than 6 minutes if I'm clipping in between each. Might not matter, but it might. Whew. Good thing I remembered to tell you. Okay, so now all I have to do is stitch this, and I'll be right back. So I finished my embroidery and my pot holder's basically almost done. Remember, I'm just doing this as a scrapbuster, so, but it looks pretty cool. I hope you agree. So what you do is after you get it done, now this is chenille put on a base, right? So I want this chenille to stay together on this base. So what I did is I took my scissors and I cut the top layers, not cutting the base. So take your scissors, take some delicate no, that's not right. These are too big. These scissors worked. These scissors worked for me to cut through. So I cut through the layers of the chenille, right? Now, if this was a smaller chenille, I would be using a little bit more delicate scissors, but you want to be careful with the point that you don't cut that bottom fabric. Now, if this was chenille that I was making, and I used this same embroidery design to make the jumbo chenille I'm going to be attaching in a minute, this chenille I made, and you can see I used that wash away stabilizer on the top. And then I really soaked this to get that wash away stabilizer out. So if you're making it like this and you use that wash away stabilizer, you basically have to wash it, get it out, then you cut the chenille strips apart, and then we're going to apply them to my little project. But once you get it ready and done and applied, either if you put it on a base or if you're using it on the other, you're going to take a brush and you're just going to really come after it and really abrade this chenille. I want you to notice that a lot of fibers come out in the brush. Now, if you were to wash this in the washing machine, you totally could, and that would really accelerate the fluffing of the fibers. But be aware, a lot of those fibers are going to be coming out. So I would go in, take my brush. I don't think a toothbrush, a used toothbrush would work. It's not rough enough. But you could use a rough brush like this to get a lot of those fibers out. I don't want your washing machine to clog up with extra fibers, and I know you don't either. So go ahead and take a bunch of these fibers out, then you can wash it, and then it should be pretty much okay. But just be aware that it's going to shred and shed just a little bit. So now, while we're here though, I want you to see, whoops, I want you to see, this is that smaller chenille that I did, and this is the size here, the one I showed you that embroidery at the very beginning. It doesn't look like much here, does it? But once you come in with the brush and you kind of come after it, it really fluffs up, and it can make an embroidery design a little bit more special. So that's just regular fluffing of the chenille. What I want to do now is I cut this one apart to make my little pillow that I'm making. Well, it's kind of a bigger pillow, and I wanted to use the scraps from what I had made, the log cabin blocks. And I know everything's going to match, right? Because I used the same fabric I used in the quilt to make the chenille that goes on the top. Now I'm just making a pillow here, but I think this would be a fun quilt, right? Now, I made a video before where I made these circle designs and I used them to quilt my quilt here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on some of the circles, I'm going to put this little jumbo chenille. And I think it's going to fluff up and look really great. Now I'm sewing it down with just a regular straight stitch. But I've set up the machine with something special. There's this Brother Stellaire. In sewing, it has some pretty great features as well. So if you look on the screen here, I've selected the straight stitch and I've selected the pivot feature. Now what this pivot feature does is when I stop sewing, what it's going to do is it's going to leave the needle down and raise the presser foot up. So as I go around this circle, or as I deal with some of these little parts of the chenille that might be kind of sticking up, I can totally adjust and I can go pretty fast without having to lift that presser foot all the time. Now the other thing that's kind of important on the machine is I'm throwing through lots of layers here. I'm sewing down the middle of this little applied chenille strip and I have a bunch of layers and it's a quilt. I'm going through that too. So this machine, and your machine might as well, has what I like to call the magic button. Now this button raises and lowers the presser foot, but it has another function. This machine has an automatic sensor system. What does that mean? That means when I have this button on the machine and I lower my presser foot and I have it set up in settings, which I just always leave turned on, it's going to know how thick my fabric is and it's going to automatically adjust the pressure of the machine. I think that's pretty amazing. If you have that feature, you don't basically have to worry when you're sewing over thick stuff, because you can go from thick to thin and the machine's automatically going to adjust itself for you, which is kind of magic. Now, this is pretty thick. I'm using the Ultra T in foot to sew it because this foot's going to let everything glide through. What I did is, well, this is thick, like I said, so it's really hard to pin down. Go ahead and pin it if you want to turn your pins into little wire sculptures. You probably don't want that. So to put it down, where do I have it? I used just some basic, I just used some school glue. It's washable. I put it on my strip. I just glued it down in place. I used that circle that I had already embroidered down there to quilt the quilt. And I just applied it down to that, and I'm just going to be sewing around it. I'm going to sew in the middle with a straight stitch. The machine's already done all the adjustments I need for this thickness. Another thing I want you to notice is when I come around and I've glued these strips together, basically when you have to join them, all you do is just abut the two. So there they are. One strip's probably not ever going to be long enough for what you need, but you can just abut them together and just sew over the top of the two. Machine's all set up. I got the right foot. I got the right settings. Let's just sew this down. Notice how the foot lifted up when I stopped sewing, and I still have enough clearance here. If you do not have enough clearance, you can always go into your settings and you can adjust the height of that pivot feature. So when you have the foot when the foot raises up, if you need it a little bit higher, you can totally adjust that in your settings. Go ahead and adjust it back after you've finished with the project. So I'm just going to sew my jumbo chenille down to all of my different little circles. When I get done, I'm going to go after them with that scrubby brush, and I think it's going to be kind of pretty. All I have to do then is make my pillow. So this is the Brother Stellaire. This is chenille, and chenille two ways. Don't forget, it's a great scrapbuster. Oh my goodness. So make yourself a pot holder. Check out the technique. I think you might like it. And your scrap bin, well, it'll thank you. So I'm Cathy Brown. This was Sewing Tech Talk, the Brother Stellaire. I'm going to have George tell you just a little bit more about this machine. Remember, features make sewing and embroidery that much easier.
Thanks, Cathy. That was an incredible presentation. And so let's go over the special offer we have on the Brother Stellaire series. So we have the XJ2, which is their combination sewing and embroidery, and the XE2, which is dedicated embroidery. They both share the same embroidery features, which is a large 9.5 by 14 inch embroidery area with over 700 80 built-in embroidery designs, and of them, over 100 of them are Disney. It also has over 30 fonts and large, beautiful monograms. And with the fonts, you can edit in all kinds of arrangements. You can arc, you can array, you can even cut and paste and kern it in some custom ways. Speaking of customization, you can take a design and do an automatic applique around it. And with the matrix copy, you can copy this very quickly to make patches. And if we had the scan and cut, we can actually send it to the scan and cut out those patches, and then embroider them beautifully. An additional advanced technology is a new 2-point laser positioning. I can take something like a name and position it perfectly on a line. I can use it to do multiple hoopings and match them perfectly. I can even use it for edge-to-edge quilting. Now, part of what the Stellaire series offers is a special relationship with the scan and cut. They actually can marry together, so I can send an applique design right from my machine and it will cut it out perfectly for beautiful applique. But better yet, I can send a design from my scan and cut and turn it into embroidery. It also unlocks a new feature where I can choose one of the colors of my design, whether if it's a built-in design, I can choose that and turn it into applique. But let's take that heart that I sent over. I turn it into embroidery. I select the color, and now it's applique. Now let's bring over the third part of the piece. I want to create my own fabric, and I can do that with Print Moda. I took an image of a rose and I arranged it just in a beautiful kaleidoscope of color. And I printed that fabric and placed it on in the scan and cut. I took my design I created on the Stellaire from the scan and cut, sent it over to the scan and cut it out, and I have one complete embroidery design created with that trifecta of creativity. Now the XJ2 also is a sewing machine, and it has a large 11.25-inch opening, beautiful lighting. It has 760 built-in stitches, from quilting stitches to applique to utility. It even has automatic stippling and some beautiful decorative stitches that are very, very wide. It also has an automatic 1/4 inch feature which moves the needle over a 1/4 inch from the foot, and you can use the laser guidance it has on there so you can just do some beautiful piecing. It also has amazing fabric control with an automatic fabric sensor, and this gives you the ability to sense multiple layers like in denim, or if I want to sew on some sheer fabric like this tricot, I can do that beautifully, or even working with elastics. It handles the fabric beautifully. If it's even more extreme, we can add the digital dual feed. This is a belt-driven feed system that gives perfect contact on the fabric. And so you see here with this marine vinyl, there's no slippage. I also can use it with such things as minky, which is hard to sew with, and of course, quilting. So let's talk about the special we have on the Stellaire XJ2. This is the combination sewing and embroidery machine. This has a manufacturer suggested list price of $12,999.99, and it's on sale for $9,999.99. We have interest-free payments, plus we're offering free shipping across the country. But wait, we have a special bonus. We're going to include that Print Moda Studio, that fabric printer by Brother. That has a retail value of $1,499, and that's included free for a limited time. Now, let's say we want the ultimate package, the trifecta of creativity. That's when we add the scan and cut. So you add the scan and cut, now we have all three items, and we have that on sale for $10,749.98. We have interest-free payments and free shipping across the country. But wait, this is for a limited time. Now, if I want just the dedicated embroidery, let's say you already have a sewing machine and you want the XE2, which is dedicated embroidery, this has a manufacturer suggested retail price of $9,999.99. We have it on sale for $7,499.99. We're offering interest-free payments as well as free shipping across the country. And of course, we're going to include that bonus, the Print Moda Studio, free with the purchase, and that has a regular retail price of $1,499. But let's make it the ultimate, the trifecta of creativity. You will get the scan and cut added with that, and that total package for all three items is $8,249.98. And we do also have interest-free payments on that as well, and free shipping. But don't wait, this is a limited time offer. Click on the link to order. You can email us at customerservice@moores-sew.com or give us a call at 1-800-865-9664.